I guess flip it on and we'll see what, this might be awkward here for a few minutes.
That's fine,
while
that's
we
just
get
fine.
started.
Yeah. Okay,
Are you ready?
you're fine. Mm-hmm.
All right. Today's date is June 4th, 2010, and it's about 11 o'clock in the morning. We're at 204 Furches Street in Raleigh, North Carolina. And this is a project of the Southern Appalachian Botanical Society, which several years ago decided that it would be a good idea to interview prominent botanists in the southeastern United States and have them recorded for posterity such that we can learn from their experiences and inspire new generations of botanists to come. My name is Mike Baranski. I'm a biologist at Catawba College. I'll be conducting this interview. Assisting me this morning is Janice Coffey Schwab from Meredith College here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we are going to be interviewing Dr. Jim Hardin. I'm a former student of Dr. Hardin, and he is and always will be Dr. Hardin to me. So I will not refer to him as Jim. That's just the way things will be. So without any further ado, I think that probably sets the background and the stage for this project. I would like to have our interviewee state his full name, please, and his age, and the position that he held at the time of retirement.
It's James W. or Jim W. Hardin. I'm 81, and I was professor of botany and curator of the herbarium at retirement in '96.
And that was at North Carolina State University.
State University.
Okay.
About 14 years ago.
14 years ago. So you've had 14 years of fun since then, correct?
Right.
Okay.
I fully recommend retirement.
Dr. Hardin, can you tell us about your family?
My wife, Dorothy, retired the same time I did. She was a grade school teacher. We have 3 daughters, 7 grandchildren. 4 of the grandchildren are here in Raleigh and 3 in Vermont. And they range from about 16 to 22 in age. One is starting, well, just graduating from high school this year and will go to UNC Wilmington next year.
How often is it possible for all of you to get together at one time?
About once a year.
Once a year you can do that. Very good, very good. Dr. Hardin, tell us where you were born, please, and the date of your birth.
I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, March 31st, 1929.
1929. So how's that fit into the Depression?
Right in it.
Right in the middle. So you probably don't have any memories of that, though, do you?
No, not at all. Thank goodness.
You probably do have some memories of being around plants and having some interactions with plants and nature in your early childhood days. Can you recollect any of those early childhood experiences with plants and nature?
My home was in Lake Junaluska, North Carolina, mountains. And we always did a lot of hiking and observing of the spring wildflowers particularly. And I had an aunt in South Carolina, just below Charlotte, who was a wildflower enthusiast, and I got out with her quite a bit. And one of her children had gotten a forestry degree at Clemson and would go out cruising timber, and I went with him several times. I didn't learn the trees, but I learned the names because I would do the recording of the data.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember Carpinus caroliniana and Quercus alba and the trees.
Yeah.
that was really my first experience with trees, and I got interested in those at that time.
Mm-hmm. So how old were you when you were doing that data recording?
Oh, this was in high school, I guess late teens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So prior to your late teens, plants were just plants?
Yeah.
Or not? They were? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that experience then, being out in the woods and recording this data for your forester relative was kind of an eye-opener for you then.
It was. Particularly scientific names was something new until that time.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting. All these long names.
So was that your first exposure to Latin, shall we say?
Oh yeah, certainly was.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I had a class in Latin in high school, but there were no scientific names involved in it.
So I suppose at that point then you could go around to all your friends and start calling things by their scientific names and impress everybody.
I think I would have been hit.
Well, maybe we've talked then about some of your early school experiences, at least with respect to when you thought you might be interested in plants. Is there more that you could tell us about, say your high school days when you maybe started thinking about that you would like to actually spend some time working with plants as a career or as a job or a profession or something?
No, not at all. In fact, I started college as a pre-med. Both my grandfathers were country doctors in South Carolina, and I was supposed to follow in their footsteps. So I took general zoology as a freshman, but then they announced that if anyone had a botany background, they could be a lab assistant, because they were switching from botany and zoology to biology. So I drove back and forth from Lake Junaluska to Cullowhee that summer and took a botany course. And then I was given the job as a lab assistant for sophomore, junior, and senior years at Florida Southern College. That's where I really became interested in botany rather than pre-med. And particularly with a professor there, Melvin Berry. We were out with him a lot, not just in the classroom, but he was doing his doctoral research, University of Tennessee, on the spoil banks of the phosphate mining operation south of Lakeland. And there were a couple of us that spent weekends with him on those spoil banks. And also, in addition to Berry, there was a professor of entomology, Roland Hussey, who was a fantastic teacher. And we were out with him a good bit too on field trips. That's where I really became interested in plants and field biology, and forgot about pre-med. Did you disappoint your folks and your relatives who had all these medical backgrounds? No, I don't think so. Not really. No. As long as I was happy doing field work, it was fine. So they were more concerned about your well-being and happiness than they were about continuing the line of medical. And back in those days too, the thought of paying for medical school was kind of out of the question. But the possibility of getting an assistantship, a lab assistantship, in graduate school for botany was real. And Barry got me into the University of Tennessee, where he was working. and I got a lab assistant and worked with Jack Sharp and Royal Shanks. Sharp was at Stanford a good bit of the year. I was at Tennessee. So really I was out with Shanks more than Sharp. But I still took biology under Jack, Uncle Jack.
Uncle Jack.
But that was a good experience. And Tennessee at that time had the system of getting a master's degree in 1 year, 4 quarters. And I was assigned essentially by Jack Sharp to work on Jugganaceae and Betulaceae of Tennessee. All of us were involved with the flora of Tennessee at that time. So I did those 2 families. When I finished that master's, the head of the department at Tennessee was going to be head at Florida State, and 2 of us followed him down. So I worked on trees of northern Florida with can't think of his name.
Maybe it'll come to you later.
Yeah, I can't.
It happens all the time.
When I was at Florida State, Wilbur Duncan at Georgia got an NSF grant to work on the poisonous plants of the Southeast. And he sent around an advertisement for 2 assistantships, 1 field assistant and 1 lab assistant. And I got the assistantship to work in the field with Duncan, and we spent that whole next year, which would be 52, traveling around the Southeast collecting poisonous plants. That was a fantastic experience. He was an excellent field botanist, and I learned a lot. But when on those trips, we ran across a couple of obvious hybrid populations of buckeyes, intermediate between Pavian and Sylvatica. And I had just become interested in introgressive hybridization from Edgar Anderson's little book that was published in 50. So I made population samples of 2 or 3 hybrid populations. And I decided that to go on for a PhD, I wanted to work on those populations. So I wrote to Edgar Anderson as a possibility, and University of Michigan, Rogers McFall. Anderson wrote that he had enough graduate students, but Truth Hall, who had been one of his students working on integration between Juniperus virginiana and Asheyi, was at Cranbrook Institute near Ann Arbor. He could be on my graduate committee. So I ended up going to Michigan. And Hall was there for 1 year. He served on my committee, but I really worked with Roger McFall for a PhD.
Well, let me back up just a little bit then to sort of get this chronologically. You grew up in Lake Junaluska, went to high school there. Waynesville, okay. And then enrolled at Florida Southern. In your first year, you were pursuing a pre-med program. And then you learned that botany was an option for an assistantship. You went back home that summer, took courses at Western Carolina.
Yeah.
Western Carolina. Yeah. And then went back and pretty much did the rest of your work at Florida Southern in botany. Is that right?
Mainly botany.
Mainly
right.
botany. And
Ecology and entomology, but essentially field biology.
geobiology. Okay, so you would have graduated in Florida Southern then in what year?
50.
In 50. And you mentioned a name that is very significant to me, Melvin Berry. um, um, Melvin Berry, you recall, or no,
Yeah.
was my mentor at West Liberty State College in West Virginia. And
He was instrumental in getting
he
you
was
down
instrumental
here.
in getting me here to Raleigh, where I eventually became your student. So I find that extremely
That's interesting.
extremely interesting connection then in terms of a history here.
He was a delightful individual, and of course a good botanist. And it was a real joy to be out with him, more than just classroom.
Right. Okay. So you finished then at Florida Southern in 50, and then the next year you were enrolled for your master's at University of Tennessee, and that took just 1 year then.
Yeah,
Took 1 year.
finished there in 51,
Uh-huh.
and then went to Florida State and spent a year there.
So did you get a degree at Florida State then?
No,
Did not.
and that was with Herman Kurtz.
Kurtz.
Finally
Okay.
thought.
Finally the name comes. Okay. Okay. And so the year at Florida, and then 2 years on the road with Wilbur Duncan.
No,
No.
1 year,
1 year on the road with Wilbur Duncan.
and then went to Michigan.
And then
in
went to
53.
Michigan. And went to Michigan in 53. How was your experience then at Michigan? What was that like? You apparently already had a project. You took your project with you.
Yeah, I took the project with me, which was sort of unusual. But McVall was okay with that, and then Herb Wagner was interested. I think one of the books that really influenced me was Edgar Anderson's little book on introgressive hybridization. And then about the same time, Stebbins' book was in 1950 also. Variation Evolution of Plants. But McVall wasn't happy with just integration between a couple of species. He thought I should do a revision of the genus. And then part of that was also integration with other species. Pavia and glabra, then Oxandra, glabra, and so all of North American buckeyes were involved in that study. And I finished in 57.
Finished in 57. Do you remember any of your classmates through any of your undergraduate or graduate experiences who developed well-known careers, people who you might call famous classmates?
No.
No, no. Yeah.
But the real influence came from Herb Wagner and Roger McVall. They were the two outstanding professors and very different individuals, but still delightful to work with.
Well, you've mentioned a lot of famous people so far, people who you were exposed to as teachers and people who you were exposed to in the field. I gather you never had Wilbur Duncan as a teacher, as an instructor. So from among those folks who actually taught you in classes, are you saying then that the most influential ones probably were Wagner and McVall then? Or is that hard? Is that hard to
Yeah,
choose?
not as classroom professors. I never had a class with Wagner.
Okay.
And I had one with McVall, and that was not that exciting.
Hmm.
It was mainly history of systematics and nomenclature. We went on one field trip that whole year. I was really in contact with Wagner more than McVall. And I was a lab assistant under Wagner for 2 or 3 years. So I really got to know him better and was influenced in terms of research and teaching more from him.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that your source of inspiration and motivation wasn't so much because you had exposure to some great influential teacher, but rather to the discipline and the mechanics of doing the work under and with those people that kept you going and inspired you.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that.
Okay. All of us have individuals who at some time in our experience have been most influential in shaping us and directing us and motivating us. Would that most influential person be from among the professional teachers and researchers that you were exposed to, or was it somebody else in your life?
You know, I think the college, university professors, and I got to know a number of others too along the line. For instance, an ASB field trip in 1951, Tuscaloosa, and the field trip was led by Roland Harper. That was
fantastic. Huh?
fantastic.
Yeah.
To be with him for a day, essentially, up the Blackwater River. And then on another field trip, he led the field trip to Mount Arabia. The meeting was in Atlanta, and it was again Roland Harper. And then that year with Duncan, Harper traveled with us for about a week. So I think he was certainly influential. Another person who I was liked very much and got a lot out of was on that same field trip with Harper in Alabama. There was a person who seemed to know everything: mosses, liverworts, flowering plants. Rudy Schuster. And I got to know him and eventually got him to come to Michigan, where he spent a couple of years. So it's been individuals like that I think have influenced me more than anything else.
Would you say that your interest in woody plants derives mostly then from your work with Duncan, or somebody else?
No, actually it started with my
that forester.
master's
the
thesis
master's.
at
Okay.
Tennessee.
Okay.
Chuggan Lacey, Betsy Lacey,
Okay.
the
Okay.
state.
When you were in school, undergraduate, but I think primarily graduate school, what was the state of botany in the country? What was going on? What were people interested in? You've already said that some of the major publications that influenced you were Edgar Anderson's work, for example, and maybe Stebbins' emerging work. What was really happening in botany at that time?
There was another one I can add to that, and that's Lucy Brown's book on deciduous forest of East and North America. That came out in '50, just before I got to Tennessee, and I had, that fall, I had a class under shanks in plant geography.
Mhm.
And then he set up an advanced plant geography for the next quarter, going through Lucy Brown's book.
Mhm.
And we took several field trips, one all the way through the state of Tennessee to the river, and camped around Bluefoot Lake,
Mhm.
looking at the various communities,
Mhm.
from the Smokies all the way west to the river.
Mhm.
That's fantastic.
Mhm. Mhm.
And of course, Lucy Brown's book mainly dealt with trees, so again, woody plants.
Did you have any interaction with Lucy Brown?
Yeah, she came and stayed with us some at University of Tennessee, and we hiked up Mount LeConte with her. She was a head ball officer going up the mountain. Little woman.
Yeah. Now, didn't she have a sister that went with her or something? Or?
She wasn't with us on that
Okay, I
trip.
see.
She did have a sister though,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
she worked with a lot in field work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Neat.
So, in addition to the formal professors, I got to know a lot of other people, like Harper and
Sure.
Schuster and Brown.
What was Harper's position at that time? That whenever you, what was he doing?
I don't know, officially.
I mean, he wasn't connected with an
He was at the
institution.
University of Alabama.
Oh, Alabama.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Had an office there
Okay.
in the Geological Survey,
Okay.
but he didn't teach. I think it was all the field work
Mhm.
for the Geological Survey.
Mhm.
There's a new book out just recently, a couple of years ago, I guess, on Harper that I want to get.
Really?
Yeah. Should be good.
So, it kind of sounds like at the time you were in school, people were interested in a lot of floristic work. There was work being done, a lot of revisionary work and things like that. It seemed like it was a great emerging field of opportunity for lots of people, or was it? Do you think that it was just something that was just happening here and there, and you just happened to be fortunate enough to be involved with it? What was the general state
No,
of things?
I think there was a lot going on in systematics,
Uh,
mainly dealing with morphology and anatomy, and
Okay.
cytology was just getting started. Ascolarvae,
mhm,
one name that comes to mind, doing a lot of chromosome counts.
mhm,
But it was mostly revisionary studies.
mhm.
Grady Webster just finished ahead of me at Michigan,
Mhm.
working on euphoria.
Well, he's a pretty famous classmate.
Well, he finished just as I came in,
Okay.
so I can't
Can't claim I was a
count that.
classmate.
A lot of floristic work, and of course McVall was involved in floristics in Mexico.
Mhm.
I never had a chance to go down with him,
Mhm.
but I missed that. But Ed Voss was there,
Mhm.
working on the flora of Michigan.
Mhm.
People were doing revisionary studies, and Reed Rollins at Harvard. A lot of people were involved with not just floristics but revisionary studies.
Mhm.
There was a lot going on. It
Mhm.
was an exciting time.
So people who were in grad school at that time probably didn't have any problem finding job opportunities once they finished school.
None.
Was there institutional support for this kind of work then, I gather?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I received a graduate school grant to do field work, traveling from Ann Arbor down to the Gulf Coast collecting buckeyes
Mhm.
first summer.
Mhm.
They paid for all the illustrations in my dissertation. So it was, money was available for that sort of work, fortunately.
Fortunately. I have to ask, you never got turned on to ferns, even though you were exposed to all of Warren Wagner's stuff, Herb Wagner's stuff.
No, we of course would look at a lot of ferns, particularly Botricium and Ophioglossum in cemeteries. Seemed to be a favorite locality for Ophioglossum and Botricium.
Yeah.
But no, there was another student there, Ken Wilson, who was working with Wagner on ferns, and then another one working on Woodsia, and another one working on Lycopodium. So the ferns and allies were taken care of.
Well taken care of. Well, how did you feel being a Southerner going to Michigan to go to school? All your other experiences had been in Florida and Tennessee. You grew up in North Carolina, traveled all around through the Southeast collecting poisonous plants and looking at buckeyes and down here and everything else. But yet here you are. I mean, going up to Michigan. That's northern country. Did you feel out of place?
My office mate, one of Wagner's students, was a great enthusiast of the Civil War. And I didn't know one general from another, and he just could not understand my coming from the South, not knowing all the details about the Civil War.
Oh. Wow.
But he learned quickly that I didn't know a thing. But otherwise, I got along all right. One time though, when I was taking my prelims, one of the professors took over my lab, and then after that he was laughing that the students had a southern accent, meiosis, and other terms that were more southern than Michigan.
Right. Right.
And he kidded me about that.
Well, so you didn't feel out of place then too much?
No, it was a good group.
Yeah.
We had a good group of graduate students, and the teaching assistants was sort of the top rank among the graduate students, and that helped.
Well, from Michigan, did any of those folks ever routinely take trips to the South, bring students and do field work down here? I mean, I seem to recall being in the field with Herb Wagner at Mountain Lake, for example, or maybe someplace else. He would come.
Mountain Lake. No one else was
No, okay.
working in the South.
Well, you finished at Michigan in '53. Is that right?
57.
57, excuse me, 57. And I guess you felt pretty confident that as soon as you finished that you'd be able to go out and get a job. How did you come to get your job at North Carolina State University? When did you find out about that? Was it just sort of there waiting for you? Did you have to work hard to get a job?
No, but one advantage I had was that Bob Wilbur, he finished at Michigan ahead of me, a year ahead of me. And he was at the University of Georgia while I was with Duncan. Then when Bill Fox died here at State, Bob Wilbur took his position. So he was here for about 4 years, really, while I was at Michigan. So when I was looking around for a job, Bob was leaving to go to Duke. So this job became open.
I see.
And Bob recommended me for this position. the job at University of Georgia was also open.
Now, which job would that have been?
Well, that would have been a new position
Okay.
working with Duncan
I see.
Systematics.
I see.
That was available. I also applied at the University of West Virginia. That was when, well, Cole was there, but somebody else came in that year.
Clovis?
Maybe Clovis. Yeah.
Okay.
So I applied for those 3 positions. And I didn't really want to go back to Georgia. This sounded like a good opportunity. I never heard from West Virginia, not even receiving an application. So obviously I came here.
Wow. Never considered applying to any school north of the Mason-Dixon line then, or?
No. No.
This was just what was available. Well, you started at State then in '57, I guess, same year you
Right.
finished.
Right. Teaching dendrology.
Teaching dendrology. And you...
And that's what Bob Wilbur had taught when he was here. Because Ernie Beale taught the systematics here.
Oh, okay.
So Beale taught systematics and I was teaching dendrology.
Well, you've had a long career at State. You started there in '57. You finished there 14 years ago. How it takes us 96. So 39 years. What was going on in botany at State at the time? You've already alluded to some things that were being taught there. What were those folks interested in? What was going on research-wise?
Well, Beale was interested in aquatics and finally published a book on aquatics in North Carolina. Ecology was a popular subject, and in '58 the ecologist left and there was an opening here and I got Art Cooper down. Art and I had been together at Michigan, and so he got the job. And ecology under Art and then Ernie Beale until he left for Kentucky. And when he left here, then I took over the systematics position. So we had a physiologist. Ecology and systematics were the big topics in this department.
Now, where did B.W. Wells fit into all this at that time?
Well, Wells had retired.
By that time, he'd already
Yeah.
retired. Okay.
But he came in occasionally, bringing things from the river, his area for identification. So we got to know him quite well.
So basically, Art Cooper took B.W. Wells' job. Is that right?
No, there had been a couple of ecologists between Wells and Cooper.
So
Another good area I think going on at State at that time was in genetics. Ben Smith and Stevens and Gerstel, cotton genetics, tobacco genetics, and Ben Smith working on all kinds of things. And the head of genetics department got together a genetics faculty that involved a lot of people in other departments, including me from botany. And that was a great group. A lot of people interested in, mentioned Bruce Zobel in Hardin, who had done integration pines in the West. So there were a lot of us involved in sort of the genetics, integration, hybridization of a lot of plants. Really a delightful interaction.
I would, well, I guess I'm proud to say that I was also exposed to a lot of those same people, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because I could feel that undercurrent of genetics spread through a lot of different departments over there at that time. How big was the department in terms of numbers of faculty whenever you first came then in '57?
Probably half a dozen of us.
Okay, so it actually was a botany
pretty small.
department.
Yes.
It was a botany department.
It had, some years ahead of that, split from plant pathology. So it was a department, and I guess maybe half a dozen was a smaller department. Anderson,
Troyer? No?
Troyer, yeah, was ahead of me. Yeah, he was here. And then Art Cooper came. Who knows? Physiologist. Phycologist.
Psychologist, right?
That was about it.
Yeah.
We would get together at the beginning of each semester, and Schofield, who was head of the department, would sit down with us and say, okay, you have a certain number of credit hours, you have the same amount, and so he doled out the teaching, and I ended up teaching general botany for a semester, just because I had to even out my teaching load. So that plus the dendrology. But dendrology then was 2 semester, hardwoods and softwoods.
So was it primarily for the forestry people?
Yeah. Big class, 50, 60.
So how many, at that time, what was the graduate program in botany like?
My first student was Ken Nicely, working on Calacanthus. Beale had, I think, a graduate student.
Was the department able to grant PhDs at that time?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
So
we had a small number of graduate students.
did you feel like the expectations for your service were primarily teaching or primarily research or evenly split, or how did you feel that things were being emphasized there?
I think there was greater emphasis on teaching, but we also recognized that we had to do research for promotion. A lot of the research was supported by the experiment station. All of my research was supported by the experiment station. Finally, NSF came into view. More people were got NSF grants. I was always supported by the experiment station. And you know, when you were here, we got a grant to work on white oak from the Forest Service. And then Carl Keener had come in on an NSF graduate fellowship. So there were a number of different types of support, and for both teaching and research. But I really think the emphasis was on teaching, and that had been since the days of B.W. Wells, the primary service of the department. And it had a good reputation for
So-
effective teaching.
So were the phycologists and the anatomists like Ball, I don't think we mentioned his name, were they all
Yeah,
getting
exactly.
adequate external support then to do their things?
Ball, I think, had an NSF fellowship,
Mhm.
research assistant, research grant.
Mhm.
Um,
It sort of seems like you and Art Cooper developed a pretty significant personal relationship that carried over into the kind of work that you did professionally, research-wise, with students, and in those areas. Can you reflect on that a little bit? How, or am I
No, I think a lot of the work, particularly at the master's level, master's theses were floristic, and they did a lot of floras of state parks around the state, and that served another purpose of building up the herbarium, because all their specimens, of course, went into the herbarium. Art and I spent a summer up at Highlands working on the flora of Toxaway Gorge, and
camped out in the rain?
camped out in the storm. Our families went up with us, and we ate in the dining room and lived at the eldest cottage. That's when I really got to know Doc Howell, too. I had known her a little bit that year at Georgia with Duncan, because I came up to Highlands to collect some poisonous plants. So I got to know Doc, and then when I came here to state, Tom Quay was the representative from state
Okay.
at the station. And he talked me into taking over his job, so I started in as a member of the Board of Managers
That's what it was called at that time?
back in those days. They were the representatives from the university's membership. Then I became secretary of the Board of Trustees, and then Board of Trustees, and then eventually president for about 6 years. That was when it was still a private corporation prior to the university taking over. But I was involved with Heine Osting at Duke, and Anderson at Duke, and Art Cooper and myself sort of got together and decided that the best solution for the future of the station was with the university. And this was behind the back of Doc Howell, because we knew that she would be opposed to that. And when it finally came out that we were doing this, she was very opposed. But when I stepped down as president, Al Radford took over, and he really finished the transition, which I'm convinced was the best thing for the station.
I'd like to come back to the Highlands thing in just a little bit, but you mentioned some other folks, people at Duke and people at Chapel Hill. Please reflect for just a little bit about what was going on regionally. What kinds of interactions were there between the folks at State in the systematics ecology area, and the folks at Duke, and the folks at Chapel Hill? What was the climate regionally, and what were people doing, and what kind of cooperation was happening, if any, between you folks?
Well, in those days, the Chapel Hill group were involved with the Florida, the Carolinas. it was about finished when I came, but due to my contact with the experiment station, I was able to get the the atlas of the flora published through the experiment station. Beyond that, there was not that much cooperation and interaction. I had more interaction with the Duke people because of Highland.
I see. Was Bob Stone over there then?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But as far as interaction with Al Radford and Richie Bell and Harry Alice, there wasn't much. I remember when we published that paper on erythronium, I gave a seminar on that at Chapel Hill. And Harry Alice, who had done the Little HE for the flora, didn't even show up for the seminar. And he never recognized umbilicatum species.
Wow.
It was not unpleasant, but there just wasn't much interaction.
Much interaction. You probably didn't you all share some students though? There was a inter-university program or something where students could take courses in all those places and have people from other institutions serve on committees and things like that. So there had to be some kind of interaction there.
Yeah, there was. In fact, I served on 2 or 3 committees of Radford students and Rich Bell students. I know I served on one or 2 committees at Duke. Jack Morrow, I was on his committee. That was later.
That was later, yeah.
And that was when, Osting had died, Anderson was, of course, in bryology. It was a different climate. We had more interaction then.
So the Chapel Hill people were sort of just really the outsiders, pretty much. Then they were doing their own thing, and not a whole lot of stuff. But as a
in fact, there was some animosity too. I know Radford wanted to get Duke collections put into the herbarium at Chapel Hill. Wilbur had nothing to do with that. No way he was going to send his specimens to Chapel Hill. So there was some unpleasantness there.
Was there any animosity from the other direction? Well, let's see. I guess I sort of have the impression that Chapel Hill, through all the floristic work and developing the flora of the Carolinas and everything, they were sort of moving themselves into being the flagship herbarium in the Southeast and this kind of thing. Did other institutions, like maybe state, view Chapel Hill people with a little bit of jealousy because of how they were so vigorously pursuing all these goals and things?
No, I don't think so. The herbarium at State served a different purpose, mainly because of the extension work. And I had contact with the extension agents around the state, and questions and plants would come in for identification. I got more of that at State than Chapel Hill did, mainly because of the extension work around through North Carolina. And that sort of made our herbarium unique and important.
With respect to teaching systematics, prior to 1968, or maybe a little bit before that, the materials, the resource materials that you might have used to teach systematics classes probably were hampered a little bit by the lack of a good regional flora. And
Well, Florida Carolinas came out, that was available when I was teaching systematics,
Right,
that was
okay.
always available.
it was available in '68, correct? No, there was a little atlas or something before that, or not the atlas, but a kind of
Well,
abbreviated version,
Yeah,
keys only or something.
that's right,
Yeah.
that small
Right,
volume.
Okay,
But we used that in the class.
okay. So that always was available while you were teaching
Right.
systematics. Okay.
And then in teaching dendrology, of course, we used Harlow and Harrow
Mhm.
textbook.
Which you eventually became the editor on, much later, one of the authors on.
Yeah, when both Harlow and Harrow died, Fred White
Mhm.
had become involved with that, and he got me to be the senior author
Mhm.
of the 7th edition.
Mhm.
And then that was in 91.
Mhm.
In 96, an 8th edition came out, and then in 2001, the 9th edition.
Mhm.
That's the last one.
Mhm. Mhm.
That was a great experience,
Mhm.
revising that
Right.
textbook.
Tell me how many students you think you've taught over the years, undergraduate and graduate.
I've had 14 PhD students, 22 masters, several MLS, Master of Life Sciences, non-thesis, 4, 5, 6 of those. As far as undergraduate students, I have no idea. Those systematics classes ranged very often 50 or so.
Mhm.
I taught plant diversity for many years, and that was a smaller class, but 15 to 20 there.
Mhm. Mhm.
In addition to those classes, I taught advanced systematics. And when Beal was here, we split that, and he taught advanced systematics and monocots, and I did dicots.
Mhm.
And then I combined it when he left.
Mhm.
But I also taught advanced taxonomy.
Mhm.
And that got students from various departments, genetics, forestry. Bruce Sobel students took
Mhm.
advanced taxonomy.
Mhm.
Horticulture, some horticulture students. That was interesting because we had such a diverse group in that class. I remember a student in genetics and Carl Keener arguing about something, and I just sat back and listened for most of the class.
Yeah.
But that was great.
Yeah.
That was great.
I'd like you to sort of reflect on your entire career at State with respect to how you think it developed from the time that you went there till the time that you left. You had a long and distinguished research career. You taught lots of different courses, exposed lots of different students to systematics, dendrology, plant diversity, all these related areas. What do you think, when you think back over that, what's most important? What's most significant? How do you see things having developed through the course of time, such that teaching versus research fit into your into your life's work there?
During the last few years, I got involved in scanning electron microscopy, looking at leaf surfaces, trichome types, and surface features. So I think in the last maybe 10 years or so, I was involved in that, doing one group after the other. And in many cases, along with the graduate students. For instance, someone working on Castanea, then I would do the SEM of Castanea. I work with Don Stone at Duke on hickories, doing the SEM. So I got really involved in the last maybe 10 years doing SEM work. Probably more research than any other time. Also, about the same time, I became involved with editing first ASB Bulletin from about 80 to 85 along in there. And then after that, editing Systematic Botany for five and a half years, from about 55 to 60. That was a great experience. I thoroughly enjoyed that. But by the time I stopped Systematic Botany, it was getting more and more molecular and computerized programs, and I just did not have the background.
All the statistics and things like that were coming along.
So that was time for me to stop.
So for the early part of your career, you were pretty much classical taxonomists, using traditional techniques, morphology, anatomy, a little bit of chromosomal work, maybe.
Not much.
Not much.
You're right, classical morphology, anatomy, mostly morphology. And that now has sort of gone by the wayside.
Right. So whenever SEM came along, that was one of the new techniques, and you adapted that into.
Oh yeah. In fact, when I gave the past president's address for ASBT,
I remember it.
the idea was new systematics.
Right.
SIM systematics.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's the last we've heard of that.
Yeah. Well, let me go back to Highlands just a little bit, and then we're going to take a break in just a few minutes. What you did or were able to accomplish with others at Highlands was very, very significant. But there were some other things that went on while you, I guess, were at the station, involved NSF grants and things like that. A lot, all this work in the gorges and great phytogeographic kinds of picture or questions and things like that. You want to reflect on that a little bit, some of those things?
Well, Osting was in charge of that gorge research.
Okay.
But I did get involved with some of the NSF grant proposals toward the end of that period. And I also, every year with Doc Howell, had to go to the Joint Appropriations Committee downtown to try to get money from the state, and we were successful in doing that. And I think that gorge research really put Highlands on the map as far as major research contribution from a High School station. I taught 3 different summers at Mountain Lake, but they didn't have a big research program. Individuals were doing research, but no station-wide research program like Highlands. And I taught a couple of summers at Oklahoma Biological Station, but again, well, I guess their big thing was fish in the Red River. That was the big research. But again, Heinz was unique in having that station-wide research program in the gorge. And it was successful in getting NSF grants for that whole program.
And there were a lot of students that went through that.
Oh, yeah. Systematic botany, entomology, mammalogy. And we had students from zoology and entomology and plant pathology going up to the station in the summer. So that was a very successful program that Osteen was in charge of.
So that was all very exciting stuff then too. Any other reflections or interesting stories about some of the Highlands experiences? You see, Doc Hal smoked a pipe. Wasn't that kind of neat?
And told dirty stories.
Dirty stories.
I remember one time when there was an NSF visitation, and one of the persons on that visiting group was escapes me. Reed Rollins was involved in one of them, but Art Cronquist
Okay.
was one I was trying to think of. We went down in the gorge with Art, and the head of, or the director of the Oklahoma Biological Station was in that same group. That's how I got to go to Oklahoma, because I got to know him. But that trip with Art Cronquist into the gorge was just delightful.
Now, was he as good a field botanist as he was a theoretical taxonomist? Or?
Oh yeah.
Really?
He was mainly working
Composites.
floristically in the West.
Okay.
So, was it intermontane flora he was involved with.
Right.
But yeah, mostly composites. And then he did the composites for the southeastern flora. There were only 2 volumes of that ever came out, the composites and legumes. That sort of went by the wayside.
Yeah. But they're very useful volumes.
Yeah.
They were. Well, please remember, since I brought it up earlier, that gorge experience in the Toxaway that you and Cooper had. Somehow I got to, I have a distinct memory that made a big impression on you guys. That down there in the gorge. What was the deal? What were you prepared? Ill prepared or something, or what?
I remember a couple of things. We camped out down there. 2 or 3 things come to mind. One was a huge storm, rainstorm, that just about washed the road away. And we were using the Jeep from the station down in there. And it had washed a big gully in the middle of the road, and then the bank on the other side was, all the way down to the river. And I drove, and Art was in front of me saying which way to go.
So he was walking.
He was walking.
I see. Okay.
And we made it out, but there was just enough of a road left to get a wheel on it. Part of that storm too, there was a lightning strike on a tree very near our campground. And that's the closest I've ever been to lightning. That was quite an experience. The other thing, we sort of went our different ways during the day. He would go one direction, I would go the other. And tried to go down a cliff and fell most of the way. He came along after me and did the same thing. We laughed about it later. But I took a pistol with me to shoot snakes, and I remember shooting a copperhead, and Doc Howell was incensed that I would
Do that.
kill a copperhead. Oh, she couldn't understand it. But it was right at my feet.
So it's a good thing you were a good shot then. Well, I guess after that trip, you and Art vowed that you had enough of this, that kind of an approach to doing field work, living down in the gorge.
Yeah, that was really the only time we had been out
Mm-hmm.
on
Mm-hmm.
a research
Mm-hmm.
venture like that.
Janice, I think at this point we'll take a little break, and there's still a lot more questions, but we'll break for a few minutes. Thanks.